Welcome to Lesson 11 on Employment Rules, a crucial part of business law. Today, we'll dive into the fundamental employment laws that every business needs to know. These rules cover important areas like termination, safety, wages, leave, and worker protection. Understanding these concepts helps ensure compliance and fosters a fair, safe workplace for everyone. Let's explore these key workplace rules in detail so you can confidently navigate employment law. Today we'll be covering 5 essential topics that are crucial for understanding workplace regulations and employee rights. First, we'll dive into termination and employment status, exploring how employment can legally end and what defines an employee's status. Next, we'll look at workers' compensation, which is vital for protecting employees if they get injured on the job. Third, we'll discuss workplace safety regulations, focusing on OSHA standards designed to keep the work environment safe. Fourth, we'll review wage and hour laws, including the Fair Labor Standards Act, covering minimum wage requirements and overtime rules. Finally, we'll cover family and medical leave, including important laws like the FMLA and COBRA, which offer protections for employees during critical life events. These 5 core areas will give us a strong foundation in employment law and worker protections. In this lesson, we're focusing on employment status, which is a fundamental concept that affects many aspects of the work relationship. First, we look at exempt versus non-exempt classifications. This distinction determines eligibility for overtime pay and other wage protections under labor laws. Next, we have full-time versus part-time status. This affects benefits eligibility, scheduling, and sometimes job security. Finally, at-will employment is a key concept, indicating that either the employer or employee can end the employment relationship at any time, with or without cause, as long as it's legal. Understanding these classifications is crucial because they directly influence which rules and regulations apply to each employee. Getting this right helps ensure compliance and fair treatment in the workplace. Now, let's talk about at-will employment, which is an important concept in employment law. Essentially, at-will employment means that either the employer or the employee can end the employment relationship at any time and for almost any reason. This means there's a lot of flexibility, but it's not a free-for-all. There are some key limits to keep in mind. You cannot terminate someone based on illegal discrimination, such as race, gender, or age. Also, employers can't retaliate against employees who exercise their legal rights or report unlawful behavior. Violations of public policy, like firing someone for refusing to break the law, are not allowed. And finally, implied contracts, even if not formally written, can restrict at-will termination if they create certain expectations. So, while the default rule is broad, it's definitely not absolute. Understanding these boundaries helps both employers and employees know their rights and responsibilities. Now let's talk about the legal boundaries around termination and employment. While at-will employment gives employers broad discretion to end the relationship, it doesn't allow firing for unlawful reasons. First, discrimination is strictly prohibited. Employers cannot terminate someone based on protected characteristics like race, sex, religion, national origin, age, or disability. Second, retaliation is also illegal. You can't fire an employee as punishment for actions such as whistleblowing, reporting violations, or taking legally protected leave like under FMLA. Third, the public policy exception protects employees from termination for doing things the law supports, like serving on a jury, voting, or refusing to participate in illegal activities. Lastly, if there's an employment contract, firing in violation of its specific terms can be considered a breach of contract. It's important to remember, not all terminations are lawful, and there are clear legal limits employers must respect. This slide covers the basics of workers' compensation, which is a no-fault insurance system designed to protect employees who suffer injuries related to their job. The key idea here is that it provides medical benefits and partial wage replacement, helping workers recover without the need to prove fault or negligence. It specifically addresses job-related injuries by ensuring that medical care is covered and that lost wages are partially compensated. Essentially, Workers' compensation offers both medical treatment and financial support after someone experiences harm while working, helping them focus on recovery without undue financial stress. Now let's dive into the core aspects of workers' compensation. First, workers' compensation provides coverage and benefits designed to support employees who suffer job-related injuries or illnesses under state law. This typically includes medical expenses needed for treatment, rehabilitation services to help workers recover, wage replacement to compensate for lost income, and disability benefits if the injury results in long-term impairment. However, it's important to recognize the boundaries of this coverage. Benefits do not apply if the injury is due to intentional self-injury, gross misconduct, or participation in illegal activities. Understanding these key points helps clarify who qualifies for workers' compensation and under what circumstances. In this lesson, we're focusing on OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. OSHA is a federal agency dedicated to protecting employees by ensuring workplaces are safe and healthy. One of their main roles is setting clear safety standards that employers must follow. They don't just set these standards, they also enforce compliance to make sure businesses are doing their part in keeping workers safe. OSHA conducts regular inspections to monitor workplaces and identify any hazards. Additionally, they investigate worker complaints to address specific safety concerns. Key elements to remember here are hard hats, inspections, standards, and compliance. These all play crucial roles in maintaining workplace safety through federal protection. In this section, we're focusing on the critical duties employers have when it comes to workplace safety. It's important to understand that employers can't just respond to problems after they happen. They need to be proactive. This means they must take steps to prevent accidents and hazards before they occur. First, maintaining a safe workplace is fundamental. This involves identifying potential risks and addressing them promptly to create an environment where employees can work without unnecessary danger. Second, employers are responsible for providing the right safety equipment. Having the proper gear is essential in protecting workers from injury, whether it's helmets, gloves, or any other necessary protective devices. Third, training is key. Employees need to be thoroughly educated about potential hazards they might encounter on the job. Proper training ensures workers know how to recognize risks and respond appropriately. Finally, employers must report serious injuries in compliance with OSHA regulations. This reporting is crucial not only for legal reasons, but also for tracking incidents and preventing future ones. Overall, OSHA compliance is all about prevention, staying ahead of risks rather than reacting after the fact. This proactive approach keeps everyone safer in the workplace. Now let's focus on the Fair Labor Standards Act, or FLSA, which is the fundamental federal law that sets the standards for pay, working hours, youth employment, and payroll record-keeping. The FLSA establishes several key requirements that employers must follow to ensure fair treatment of employees. First, it sets the minimum wage, guaranteeing workers receive at least a baseline amount for their labor. Second, it covers overtime rules, ensuring that employees are properly compensated for hours worked beyond the standard workweek. Third, it includes restrictions on child labor to protect younger workers from hazardous conditions and excessive hours. Finally, it requires accurate record-keeping, meaning employers must maintain detailed payroll and time records to demonstrate compliance. Together, these elements form the backbone of wage and hour regulations nationwide. Now let's dive into Lesson 11, which focuses on wage standards, specifically the essentials of the Fair Labor Standards Act, or FLSA. First, regarding minimum wage, employers must pay at least the federal minimum wage, but if a state or local rate is higher, then that higher rate takes precedence. So, the key takeaway here is that employees should always receive the highest applicable minimum wage between federal, state, or local laws. Moving on to overtime rules. Generally, non-exempt employees are entitled to time-and-a-half pay for any hours worked over 40 in a work week. This means they earn 1.5 times their regular hourly rate for those extra hours. Understanding the distinction between exempt and non-exempt employees is crucial because this classification determines who is eligible for overtime pay. Essentially, non-exempt workers get overtime, while exempt workers typically do not. This distinction is vital for compliance and accurate payroll management. Now, let's discuss federal protections concerning child labor laws, which are crucial for safeguarding young workers. First, age restrictions play a major role. Generally, children under 14 cannot work in non-farm jobs. Those aged 14 to 15 are allowed limited roles, typically in retail or office settings. For hazardous occupations, the minimum age is 18, reflecting the higher risks involved. Second, we have hour limitations. Minors must follow stricter work schedules compared to adults. There are specific restrictions on how many hours they can work during school days and school weeks. Additionally, night work is limited for younger teens to ensure their safety and well-being. Lastly, certain types of work are prohibited. Young workers are never allowed to operate dangerous machinery or power-driven equipment. They are also barred from hazardous jobs like mining, roofing, or excavation. These rules exist to prevent serious injuries and ensure a safe work environment. Keep in mind, some states may impose even stricter federal standards to offer further protection. Today we're focusing on protected leave, specifically medical leave and caregiver rights under federal law. The key legislation here is the Family and Medical Leave Act, or FMLA. This act provides eligible employees with up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave to address major family or medical needs. Importantly, during this leave, employees are guaranteed job protection, meaning their position, or an equivalent one, is secured upon return. Additionally, group health insurance coverage continues throughout the approved leave period, ensuring employees maintain their benefits. Understanding these protections helps employees balance important personal responsibilities without fear of losing their job or health coverage. Let's also consider how these protections apply in real-life situations, highlighting the essential role of FMLA in supporting workers during critical times. In this lesson, we're focusing on leave protection under the Family and Medical Leave Act, or FMLA. FMLA provides coverage for several key situations where an employee needs to take time off. First, it covers the birth or adoption of a new child, giving parents time to bond and care for their family. It also includes leave to care for a family member who has a serious health condition. Additionally, if the employee themselves is dealing with their own serious health condition that makes them unable to work, this leave applies. There are also provisions related to military service. Military caregiver leave allows employees to care for a covered service member with a serious injury or illness. Then there's military exigency leave for qualifying needs arising from an active duty call to service. An important part of FMLA coverage is the requirement for timely employee notice. Employees must inform their employer as soon as possible when they need to take protected leave. Overall, these 6 common qualifying reasons form the backbone of FMLA protections, ensuring that employees can take necessary leave without fear of losing their job. In this lesson, we're focusing on federal benefits protection, specifically COBRA, which allows for the continuation of health coverage after employment ends. Essentially, employers are required to let employees who have been terminated or separated keep their group health insurance temporarily, though they must pay for it themselves. Who qualifies for this? Well, it's employees and their covered dependents who lose coverage following certain events like job loss or changes in employment status. The length of this continued coverage typically ranges from 18 to 36 months, depending on the specific qualifying event involved. One important point to note is about the cost. Unlike when you were employed under COBRA, the former employee usually pays the entire premium without any contribution from the employer. And remember, this continuation is temporary. It's not meant to be a permanent solution, but rather a bridge to other coverage options. In this lesson on compliance, we're focusing on the critical role that good record-keeping plays in supporting every wage, safety, and termination decision made in the workplace. Payroll records are essential, and they must be properly maintained to ensure accuracy and compliance. It's important to track hours worked carefully, document any wage deductions clearly, and log all safety incidents promptly. Additionally, termination documentation needs to be retained appropriately to protect both the employee and the employer. Essentially, Maintaining accurate records serves as your audit trail, your files, and your strongest evidence if any issues arise. Remember, if something isn't documented, it becomes much harder to defend later on. Good record keeping is truly the backbone of compliance. Now let's talk about some of the most common compliance pitfalls that employers frequently encounter. First, misclassifying employees is a major issue. When employees are not correctly classified, it can lead to significant tax, wage, and benefits liabilities that can really add up. Next, failing to pay overtime is another common mistake. This can result in back pay obligations, penalties, and employee claims that mount quickly if not addressed. Third, inadequate safety training is a serious risk. Without proper training, the likelihood of workplace injuries increases, and employers can face stiff penalties from OSHA. Fourth, improper termination without the right documentation makes it much harder to defend against disputes and resolve them effectively. Finally, neglecting leave obligations, like those under the FMLA, can lead to violations and legal complications. Now let's talk about compliance essentials and the importance of proper documentation as your legal shield. Good documentation is critical because it clearly shows what happened, when it happened, and why the business took certain actions. First, having clear job descriptions ensures everyone understands their roles and responsibilities from the outset. Second, consistent performance reviews provide ongoing feedback that can support decisions related to promotions, raises, or addressing issues. Third, keeping written discipline records documents any problems and the steps taken to address them, which is vital if disputes arise later. Fourth, having documented termination reasons shows that decisions to let someone go are based on solid, legitimate grounds. Essentially, this paper trail protects your decisions by providing evidence and transparency. It's a crucial practice that helps safeguard your business legally and promotes fairness throughout your organization. This is the key takeaway from Lesson 11 on documentation. To wrap up, let's review the key takeaways from this lesson. First, employment relationships are governed by a mix of federal and state laws, so it's important to understand both levels of regulation. Second, while at-will employment is common, there are significant exceptions that can affect how and when employment can be terminated. Third, workers' compensation operates as a no-fault insurance system, meaning workers are protected regardless of fault in workplace injuries. Fourth, compliance with safety standards and wage and hour laws is absolutely crucial and non-negotiable to maintain a fair and lawful workplace. Finally, thorough documentation plays a vital role. It safeguards both the employer and the employee by providing clear records of agreements and incidents. Keeping these points in mind will help ensure effective and compliant employment practices. As we wrap up with Lesson 11, the focus is on building a more compliant workplace by turning legal awareness into concrete systems, everyday habits, and strong leadership accountability. First, it's essential to audit your current policies. This helps identify gaps and ensures everything aligns with regulations. Next, train your managers and HR teams thoroughly. These are the people who implement and uphold these policies day to day. Finally, adopt robust record-keeping systems. Accurate and organized records are crucial for demonstrating compliance and supporting accountability. By moving from policy to practice in these ways, you create a workplace culture that not only understands compliance, but lives it every day.